one point you made actually in one of your recent podcasts, or I think it was made by one of your guests, but it is sort of interesting here, is that there is a divide though, is that in developed countries, take America for example, people in what you might call the upper economic sphere, the upper economic sections of society, they too still tend to get married and they still have children. It's basically the further down the economic scale you go, this is where things have dissipated. Is that a familiar analysis to you?
Yes, absolutely. I think this ties into the concept of luxury beliefs as well. The
Luxury
idea that,
beliefs. Sorry, luxury beliefs. That's a
yes,
great.
I think
How would you sum up luxury beliefs?
beliefs that are professed by the upper classes with little to no consequence to them
Right.
because their actual lived experience is quite different, or they're insulated by their wealth or prestige from the consequences of acting on these beliefs.
Right.
Um, and that affect the lower classes in a disproportionate way because they don't have these protections,
Mm.
or they don't have a fallback. Like for example, if someone wants to try to live a drug-fueled polyamorous existence in their 20s, but they are the son of I don't know, a lord or someone who's got a lot of insulation, both social and financial, then the consequences in their 30s and 40s won't be as intense as someone who goes on that path. If they're a 20-year-old and says, okay, this is my life now, there's no coming back from many of these things, and they do tend to end up as social dysfunctions at the bottom. But they seem like interesting things to profess at the top with little consequence. This isn't my concept. I think it was Rob Henderson who promoted this idea, and I think
Yes.
it's quite a useful lens on current situations.
But I think it seems to be all of a piece with a general trend in society whereby I think it's even Robert Pullman has written about this, that people in what you call upper class economic sections of society, they tend to intermarry. I mean, even from the point of view of meritocracies, if you like, they kind of intermarry. So if anything, there is less movement as well between them and people beneath them, in a way that there might have been more in the past, strangely enough, when it was all about social class.
Exactly, and I think immigration is a layer on top of this as well.
Yeah.
Hi guys, as you can see, the problem we are having today is that women don't want to take accountability. They blame everything concerning relationship to one thing or the other. At first, it was the patriarchy, and now she's saying that it's because of the immigration, never looking within. The third wave women empowerment have taught women to stay in career, to seek for career until they are in their 30s before they can be thinking about relationship and trying to connect to make a family. And that's why the reason why the West is not giving birth to children. By the way, this is Marriage or Bachelor Highlight, and in today's video we are talking about why is it that in the Western world there are few more children being given birth to these days. Let's continue watching the video. Share your thought down below, because this problem is becoming rampant, especially in the Western world, because women have been taught to stay out of relationship to focus on their career. Let's continue watching the video.
Union is, there's a certain strip mining of cognitive potential of human capital from the developing countries or from the lesser developed countries, moving to the great cities of Europe, and a big concentration there. And then you have what you mentioned as well, assortative mating, where people who are in the same either a social class or cognitive class tend to cluster together, and then either for purposes of maybe they just like each other more, they're in the same university, or for the purposes of legacy wealth, maintaining wealth in families and building wealth, then they marry, they stay married. There's actually more to lose if you divorce and you're quite a wealthy individual. So there's more incentives to stay together. For children as well, there's social pressures. So there are a lot of incentives pointing towards people in the upper strata, leading much more conventional lives, leading the much maligned lives of the 1950s patriarchs, which
Yes.
they, on the front end they despise and they counsel other people against. But if you really look at life outcomes, that's how they live.
I think it's again, just to pursue this point just one more time. There's also a sort of feeling that if you are going to question and undermine institutions in society, whether it's the academic world, whether it's the legal world, and crime and punishment, that essentially, if you are from a more privileged background, you will again still have a cushion. And it's the people basically from lower income groups simply do not have that. If you take away the legitimacy of, for example, law enforcement and things like that, they will be left with the consequences of that, won't they?
Exactly, and I think that at a very deep level, this is a theft from the so-called lower classes. I don't think it's even wise to call anyone lower class at the moment, except for maybe certain demographics that are hated throughout. But most people are disadvantaged or underprivileged, or there's always a kind of a contextual layer.
This is another politically correct statement. When we talk of a low class, or when the society talk of low class, not everybody is willing to change their situation. And there's no government that can make everybody equal. Life is not fair. You have to fight to the top. Even if it's so-called born with the golden spoon, there is somebody in that family that fought for that family to be at the top. We are not in a communist society where they make everybody to be equal, which has never worked. So I don't know where this one is coming from. Please share your comment down below. Let's continue watching.
Why this is just a stroke of luck, but sometimes it's not just bad luck. It's lack of basic life instructions, like you probably need insurance. You probably don't want to have children out of wedlock because negative things happen. Maybe you have children when you're slightly more settled. There are different ingredients that back in the day used to be imposed by the iron hand of the patriarch, or whatever we want to call it, but they were just that was the water we swam in. There was stigma associated with not following these paths. There were old wives snickering in corner rooms about people who hadn't done this. So there are little mechanisms for enforcement. It wasn't all just being exiled from the village if you were being bad and going against the grain. Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, this was the way of the community to maintain an equilibrium, a positive equilibrium with pro-social goals.
Yes. You mentioned, if we just go back a little bit to the reasons for example, population decline in the developed world, and you said, there has been this break between stimuli and procreation, actually, that essentially on almost all fronts there's been a break which is relatively new in history. But also you go into the whole dating thing. You look at internet dating, which is basically where all dating happens now. How is it reflected? I mean, if we were to look at the way people now make relationships or try to, what can you see there as patterns that might also throw light on this? I mean, this is one of the things you wrote about.
Yes, absolutely. I think in the dawn of internet dating, it was expected that, okay, this is the new algorithmic dating. It will help you find the perfect mate for you. And it sounded really, really great because you're okay. There's so many factors that you can now match with people on. It's much more certain that you'll find someone that actually reflects your values. But what this ignored is that dating is basically competitive. Everyone wants the best mate. Everyone wants, to trade up as much as possible. And in terms of how women and men date, there are different strategies typically. Obviously, at the moment we're told that men and women are basically interchangeable. They have the same urges and things like that. But I think on this show we can maybe skip over explaining why that is not the case. And so women will typically want, overall, obviously on average, will want more commitment, more longer term relationships. That would be the goal. Obviously, even if they have some more casual relationships, in the end, typically they would want to settle down or have a longer term relationship. Men, on the other hand, will date much more freely, and they will date all across the spectrum. Women that are within their socioeconomic stratum, women outside of that, different types of women. And these two dating strategies, they clash when they're put together in these algorithms, and they're all kind of united under the header of dating, but they're essentially two markets trying to find equilibria that are different for each of these. So typically what happens in this algorithmic dating situation is that men that are at the top of the hierarchy, say the 5 to 10% of top men in terms of, how they look or how they can present themselves on these apps, show their socioeconomic position, all sorts of good qualities. They will date intensely because they don't really have a cap on how much they can date, and they might date a woman every night for a week, or so they essentially they corner the market. And for women looking for a relationship, they're like, okay, I can go on a date with this guy, and then essentially the guy maybe dates you once or twice, but then does never calls back. Yeah. And this is essentially a weird equilibrium in which maybe, let's say, 80% of the bottom men, they don't go on any dates at all. Or maybe I'm exaggerating, but a very, very large percentage of men don't go on any dates at all, because the women tend to be pickier. They want to go dating with the higher class men. And the higher class men as well, they don't mind having these dates with the women, but they won't commit. So essentially, a lot of people are locked in these, women trying to get a long-term relationship, men at the middle and bottom not getting any opportunity to have a relationship, and then these kind of harems light for guys that are at the top of the hierarchy, and that can, all the cards are on their table, but there's not really any incentives for them to settle down in any way. So this is a bad balance. This is a bad equilibrium, and it's something that's not very apparent from people that just look, oh, it's a dating app, obviously find random people. But because of this competitive nature and because of how the strategies are different, it obviously, what it does in terms of procreation and why it stalls it is that women cannot get the long-term relationships they want. The men at the top are not incentivized to settle down, and the men at the bottom don't even get to play the game at all. So it's no one's getting any time to have children in this combination.
But this is kind of brutal, isn't it, Alex? I mean, it almost feels. I mean, but basically, it seems to me what this means is that the internet is just reflecting the most kind of traditional idea about what men and women want. That women want someone who's basically going to be a good father, a good provider, an alpha male, call it what you want. And also the men, on the other hand, are sort of wanting to spread themselves as far as possible, with little consequences. Is that correct, do you think?
I think the market provides, and I think in subtle ways, people will react on their biological settings and on the incentives that are presented to them. If you look at this from the perspective of a single individual in this system, obviously you'd want to date the most interesting person that you can on that app. And if a very high status man wants to go out on a date with a woman, her incentives are to say, yes, of course, let's go out there. But what she doesn't know is that, what his state of mind is, because he's spoiled for choice. Him being spoiled for choice, that kind of sets up his incentives as well, because even if he wants to have a long-term relationship, then he is incentivized to think about it, and he's incentivized to really take his time, maybe pick out a woman that's extraordinary. With time and with a lot of exposure to different women, it becomes very hard to make that choice because women are different. They all have faults. They all have, interesting qualities. None of them is going to be perfect. So if you're just waiting for the perfect one, then you might be waiting for a very long time. It's also, for men, the prospects of dating tend to increase with socioeconomic status. And with time, men do acquire typically more resources. A man at 38 or 40 is quite in his prime, and he can, maybe think about, maybe playing around even more. So the incentives kind of align for him as well to be continuing to stay on these apps. And all of these little factors come together and they result in this pretty hideous equilibrium for people trying to, each of them is trying to make a good life for themselves, but overall it's not very good. And for the guys at the bottom, there's no story to tell because no one swipes right there. It's quite a it's not great.
Do you think as well there's something in the view which is the bleak view, but it's one that seems obvious to me, that in developed countries, in the West, different countries, that basically there's little sense anymore of a future, in the sense that people don't talk about it. They don't. It's not in the air. So therefore, if that is the case, then why would you have children? Because the whole point of children, of course, is the future. It is basically making sure the species goes on. And yet we don't appear anymore to think very much about the future or consider it as being a desirable, nice place to be.
Yes, I think that's probably definitely part of the issue, because on the one hand you have this very direct, individualistic, rational agent idea of what it is to be a human, to produce and go up in status and then be a consumer of different high status goods, and you can fill a life with all this distraction. Then on the other hand, you also have the idea that belonging to a lineage, belonging to a culture is pretty disgraceful. If you're not, part of some exotic culture where that's still allowed, but if you're, for example, a British man, it's probably not a good idea to be making a big deal out of the fact that you like Britain in the context that you grew up in. You'd like to participate in creating your lineage to, promote your country within, whatever parameters you think are useful for it. Be proud of who you are, all of this stuff. So that's if you can't have a past, why would you want a future? There's not really that much to live for, except for the moment-to-moment enjoyment.
These things you mentioned there, I suppose, Alex, really are now considered low status things to have, aren't they? Like a belief in your locality, your nation, your family.
Absolutely. These are chav things, if I remember correctly. Yeah, only people who are not enlightened enough to realize that we're all a part of the global village, and that borders are a human invention. Those people, they get to enjoy their lineage.
What is it like, therefore, in Romania? Is it the same situation, or is it markedly different where you are?
I think Romania is kind of the quintessential country in transition, and where we're transitioning to is, trying to be a worthy member of the kind of Western Empire, and by this I mean probably American influence. And we're not there yet, but I think we're 5 years down the line, because this is aspirational. The West is aspirational, and whatever comes down the pipe from the West, we'll take it. It might take a bit of time for it to trickle down, and now our elites, the people who've studied abroad and worked abroad, they are very much proud neoliberals. But your average man, probably not yet. But yeah, as I said, it trickles down. These beliefs really do trickle down.
Is that something that you would both regret and resist, presumably?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely used to be very much part of that class, looking to the West, trying to integrate. I got a degree in diversity management at a fine Western university. So I know the lingo. I know exactly what was expected of me. Yeah, after a while, it became clear to me that that wasn't a good direction to go. So I would personally resist it, but I don't think it's a very mainstream view.
You were in London, were you not, for a while, Alex?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, and but a lot of people listening to you would think that you were born and bred American, and now but not at all. No, right?
No, no, not at all. I watched so much television, and believe me, I tried to get a bit of a British accent, or at least a British affectation when I was in the UK. It just doesn't stick after a while. When you're 25, it doesn't it doesn't work anymore.
No. Um, when you say it's sort of coming down the line, say to Romania, 5 years' time, it's sort of already seen. This is something that I've heard from. We've had a guest on the show quite recently called Frank Furedi, who's originally Hungarian. He sees the same thing happening in Hungary. From which channels is it coming? Is it via Netflix, or is it the academic ideas? How?
I think it's mostly via Netflix. I would say it's
You see, guys, this thing is spreading like disease. That's why we as men need to upgrade ourselves, because dating has been changed by the empowerment of women. It is women that have to grow up ourselves and decide for ourselves, are you for or not? Because as for most men now, including me, I better be a casual bachelor for the rest of my life. As he said, that it's far more better to be alone than to be with a nagging woman. I believe so. Because this thing from the Western world is spreading all over. Almost all over the world. Let's keep watching the video.
via Instagram. It's via because now you have the so-called woke capital. Almost all multinationals have to have a layer of social justice embedded somehow, and they're promoting it in every way. I mean, I keep bringing up this example, but it was really funny to me because I went for coffee with a friend here, a childhood friend in Romania, and she was talking to me about abortion rights in Alabama, and it was quite shocking. Like I would probably put good money on the fact that she didn't know the intricacies of local elections, but she was very clued into potential human rights abuses in Alabama, and
Yes.
all the nuances of that debate. And it was a bit interesting to me because this is, I mean, I live in a small town. This is not Bucharest. This is it's been trickling down very hard. And
Hi guys, you can hear it from yourself as this is spreading around the world like wildfire. Okay, I can't continue again. I will put the link down below. You can go there, support the channel. This is very rich information for us, especially for women, to understand what is on women's mind nowadays. Women are leaving family, children at the end of their life where they are almost hitting the wall. Share your thoughts down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos. So see you. Thank you very much.